Bruins Beat is brought to you by Prizepicks.
And welcome into the Bruins Beat presented by Prizepicks. Go use that promo code CLNS to get $50 back when you play just $5. I'm Evan Marinofsky. That's Conor Ryan. Connor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. Doing great. We are, what are we talking about today? I don't know. Is there anything to discuss?
I think we're at the point, right? We're just talking about, what are you watching these days? How I Met Your Mother? What are we watching
Never.
these days?
No.
Yeah, we hit that point?
No,
Okay.
We're not there. No. We're still finishing Better Call Saul. I got logged out of my sister's Netflix, so I have to every 14 days re-sign in and get a code, and so I've been busy. So now I got to finish Better Call Saul. Rough times. You and I have not spoken. Publicly sounds insane to say, but we haven't spoken, on this about the deadline since then. You and I have discussed it. We discussed it at Warrior, obviously, and sort of as it was happening, but we haven't done a podcast or a show since the deadline happened. And what a difference a week makes. I mean, think about a week ago today, we sat here and we're like, what are they going to do? And we both said they're going to be conservative. Like I said, it'll be Frederick and Brazeau, and then I don't really see them doing anything else. Because again, the money they spent last offseason, I felt like, all right, they're just going to run it back. And they didn't. And I commend them for it. And we'll get into whether or not those decisions are right or wrong. I found it interesting. Don Sweeney used the word. He said, it's not a tear down, which we can debate because that looks like a tear down. I know you didn't touch the three core pieces, but what a deadline it was. Marchand out the door, Coyle out the door, Carlo out the door, Frederick out the door, Brazeau out the door, Henry Yokiharu in the door.
Hell, dude, if he plays like he did on Saturday, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that insane game that they had. But
yeah. So where are you at with the dust has settled, or at least it's starting to hit the ground? Where are you at with what happened last week?
Yeah, a wild couple of days. I still haven't anything caught up on my sleep, so looking forward to that one of these days. We'll see if the Patriots stop signing everyone. I'll be able to chillax maybe tonight.
Go to bed.
No, I agree. It is definitely jarring, right? In terms of you're looking at guys that have been here for a long time, not just Marchand, but Coyle, Carlo, these guys that have had a lot of, tenure with this team. They're, even guys like Coyle and Carlo, even though they didn't have permanent A's, are like that next tier of leadership, been here around for a while and, have been here with the guys like Bergeron and Chara and all those players as well. There's kind of that lineage and that link. And now with those guys gone, with Brad Marchand gone, it is kind of a completely new chapter. So it is shocking in the fact that it all came within an hour or so of each other. We went from nothing going on. You're like, all right, well, I guess they're moving Frederick and Brazeau. We all kind of saw that coming. To then all of a sudden they move Coyle and and then right at the 11th hour you move Marchand, and then 2 minutes later the news broke about Carlo. So it was a whirlwind for sure. A lot going on, but I agree, and I think we'll dive more into Marchand because I think that is probably, without a doubt, the most divisive discourse I think we're going to talk about, and I think that's probably the one thing that gives some fans pause, because I think as a whole, I agree with what you said, Evan. What the Bruins did, they very easily could have, they all accepted that this year wasn't it, right? Nothing's going right. You gotta sell off pieces, make the most of it. But I think a lot of us, and I even have said it multiple times, I expected more of the cautious approach, right? We knew they're moving Frederick. We know they're moving Brazeau. Are they going to take that extra step? Probably not, right? If they think they can, move things around and get back at it, they bring back Coyle and Carlo signed on a pretty good deal. Marchand, you figure it out, he's not going to go anywhere. And again, they go bold with it. And I think you look at a lot of the returns, right? Whether it's Frederick getting a second round pick there, Brazeau getting 3 assets for a pending UFA, and again, Lauko and Husandinov both, I think, can provide pretty solid roles, to then getting guys with Carlo and Coyle that will help you now and ideally for the future, right? I don't think Bruins fans, even ones that have an affinity for Coyle and Carlo and Frederick, look at the returns and be was that worth it? And it's not to discredit Coyle and Carlo and what they've done for this team and maybe what they can do. But you look at like from the angle of the Coyle deal, right? Great guy, super accountable, local guy, great Bruin, has done a lot for this team. But when you look at him signed through next year, like what is going to offer more value to a team that needed to kind of rip the Band-Aid off and start anew? Like, is it Coyle next year at 5.25, or is a guy like Casey Middlestat who hasn't reached his potential yet, but is 6-7 years younger than Coyle, still has some upside. And like, even if, I'm not saying you're going to bring him in, he's going to be an 80-point guy. The Bruins would love that if you put him in those spots. But I think they view him as kind of like what Zacha was, right? Like you put him in a new role, maybe open up more top 6 minutes, power play reps for the guy. And Don Sweeney himself said, like, he's a different player than Coyle, but maybe where like this Bruins team couldn't generate offense, didn't have enough speed and skill, a guy like Middlestat's worth taking a flyer on, because Middlestat's an interesting kind of player, right? Because I think he's maybe viewed as not a bust, but like maybe you wanting more from a guy that was an 8th overall pick.
Yeah,
but
I think he'd be someone that you'd have go from like an 8th overall pick to like the 17th or 18th overall pick. Yeah. I think that's sort of what people are getting at with him.
Yeah, and I think like, there's obviously, I think, warts in his game, but he still has a 59-point season and a 57-point season. So like if he's a 45-point guy, like he's already giving you probably the production Coyle has, and I think he has more to give there, even if it's a different look. So you like that. You like that you got a second-round pick again. The more second-round picks the Bruins can take, the better. And you get a guy in Will Zellers who, again, you look at his profile, and yeah, he has to work on some parts of his game. He's a smaller guy, but he has 37 goals in 40 USHL games. And the Bruins just need that kind of skill. Like, could he be a middle 6 guy in due time? That'd be great. But like, it's good just adding him to the mix for a prospect pool that doesn't have that. So I think you look at that. You look at Carlo with Fraser Minton and a first-round pick. I think that was a good bit of business as well. Listen, it's something where if this whole year has gone to shit, which it sure has, a lot has gone wrong. And if you're the Bruins, it's such an outlier that, you ideally don't want to be in this spot moving forward. Might as well just rip the Band-Aid off and make the most of a shit year, right? Which, of course, the Bruins then win on Saturday against Tampa, and kind of, the perfect, way to end this is getting all these assets and then getting a legit, top 10 pick. We'll see what happens there, but I do think it was a credit to the Bruins for being bold and knowing when this year is in it, and kind of getting a jump start on what they view, at least, as a retool on the fly. We'll see how legitimate that is and how productive this offseason can be, but that's kind of where they're at right now.
Yeah, I think, it's a new era. It's a new era. And I think when we look back at March 7th, as trade deadline day, March 7th, 2025, I think that's going to be looked at either as an amazing day where it's like, when they win the cup in 2029 or 2030, and we're like, that was the day where this started. Or it could be the day we look back at and go, that was where they totally went the wrong direction. It's the day that things went to hell. They start to become a lottery team, or you have to end up trading Pastrnak or something. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's no matter what, March 7th is going to be a day we look back on with some very strong reaction. And I get that fans are pissed. I get it. Even the ones who wanted a rebuild or a retool. Carlo and Coyle are fan favorites. So is Frederick. Marchand is Marchand. Like, I didn't expect fans to be like, oh, good. Not every fan is going to see Marchand getting dealt or Coyle or Carlo getting dealt and going, oh, that's great. Like, they're getting futures. Like, they want those guys now. And I get that. I think Coyle and Carlo is more cut and dry. They sold high on those guys. They don't expect to be fully contending the next couple of years. I also think they wanted a different identity. I think trading Coyle for Middlestat is the right idea. And obviously you got more. You got a second rounder. You got Will Zellers. It's the right idea in going younger, going more skilled, going faster. And I think that's one thing when you look at these returns, at players that they got back, at prospects, at what they hope to do with these picks. They got younger. They're trying to get faster. They're trying to become more skilled. And they got a lot of centers. They got a lot of centers on Friday. Whether or not any of those are the number one guy are going to be, your future number one, that remains to be seen. But they got a lot of centers. And I just think, one criticism we had and one thing they really, really messed up on last offseason was we're going to get bigger and stronger and tougher, and we're going to out-Panthers the Panthers. And it didn't even last the half a season. It did last half a season, but not even a full season.
Felt like longer. It felt like 4 years the way this season's been going.
It did. And the reality is, you think even back to last year in the playoffs, they did not, the Bruins did not have the skill and the speed to compete with the true cup contenders. I mean, they beat up on the Leafs. They almost lost that series. People forget. And then against the Panthers, they were completely outmatched talent-wise. And this whole season, every team is faster than them. Every team was more skilled. And, I think that that's an indictment on them. And I think they realize that. Charlie Coyle's a great piece. And for a good Stanley Cup team, he's a great third-line center. And Brandon Carlo, nice top 4 defenseman. And I think that's great for a contending team. But were they going to move the needle? And I also think, you look at sports in general, and the Bruins seem to hold on to their middle tier guys like tight, really tight. And I'm not saying that glue
guys, right?
I love their glue guys. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. They've had a good culture for a long time, and Carlo and Coyle were great for that. But do you really need to have them for all that time and not win anything? Like I do think that matters, and I don't blame them for dealing those guys. Marchand's a different case. I think people were expecting a big return on Brad Marchand. It's like, oh, well, if Brock Nelson got this, and I still think they did not get enough for Brad Marchand. I think there is a legitimate case to be made. And again, you get into no trade lists and things like that, but I think there is a legitimate case that you look at the Bruins and go, why did you just do what he wanted? Why did did you have better offers on the table from the Kings or the Vegas Golden Knights? Why did you just pick Florida? And obviously they did out of being kind to Brad Marchand and out of respect, because that's where he wanted to go. Now, there have been a lot of reports on the contract dispute. Obviously, Don Sweeney said there was a sizable gap on Friday. Elliot Friedman reported this morning, Monday morning, that he firmly believes Boston's offer to Marchand wasn't less than his current AAV of $6.125 million. Goes on to state he's certain his offer from Boston wasn't less than his current salary and wasn't being asked to take a pay cut either. So it sounds like the Bruins are kind of countering the Friedman report, or at least trying to
with Friedman himself.
Yeah. Like just going both sides, or, they're in both of Friedman's ears. So again, I mean, if they weren't asking him to take a pay cut, clearly Brad Marchand thinks he's worth a lot more than what he's currently making, at least over the next couple of years. It sounds like term wasn't an issue. It sounds like 3 years was around what both sides were kind of cool with. And then we had the report over the weekend that Marchand wanted to meet them in the middle somewhere. He wanted to compromise, and the Bruins were not willing to budge. So it sounds like the Bruins were giving him a raise, but we're not going to go above that. And Brad Marchand wanted more than that.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Like, I feel like we won't be able to give the final grade or the final summary of this entire saga until we get to the offseason. We figure out where Marchand signs, and for most importantly, how much, right? Because as soon as listen, I think the initial reaction is one that's still like, man, if you're going to move your captain, a guy that's been ingrained in the culture here, you want more for that, even if it's a pending free agent. Because, I mean, you look at what the Flyers got for Giroux, who, I always felt like when they traded Giroux, he was 31. Like, he was still a guy that's been in the league for so long. He was 34. So I was like, all right, if you get an Owen Tippett, a first and a third,
yeah,
pretty good bit of business. You look at what the Bruins gave up to get Rick Nash, who is 33 on his last legs, unfortunately, because of injury. So I do think it's unfortunate for the Bruins that if you are going to rip the Band-Aid off, you only get a conditional 2027 pick that maybe becomes a first, but there's 2 conditions on top of it. I wish there was just one involved. You need the Panthers to essentially get to the Eastern Conference Finals, and Marchand has to play 50% of the games, which, if he's healthy, I'd rather just be the condition instead of hey, if shit goes haywire and a Panthers team that's been to 2 cups in a row comes up short against a good Toronto team or a good Tampa team, them's are the breaks, right? So yep. I don't like that there's 2 conditions on top of it. Again, I think a lot, unfortunately, was not working in the Bruins' favor in terms of the Marchand injury. I think if he was healthy, you're probably getting more. You're either getting a locked-in first-round pick, even if it means one down the road in 27, when like you first hear it's the Panthers and it took forever for us to get the news. I'm like, are they getting like Mackie Samskevich, however you say his name, like a young winger?
Samskevich from Connecticut.
Yeah, yes. Are you getting a guy like that? My first like thought was like, are they getting like fucking Lundell or something? Which I know is insane, but like
I agree.
When you first see those moves, you just start like racing as to what the thing is. Same with like Toronto. I'm like, when they got Carl, I'm like, Matthew Nyes is way too good to be an actual trade chip now. And I know that sounds ridiculous because he's a beast, but it's like you're just trying to rack your brain.
Well, even like when the
these guys have,
when the Marchand to LA rumors, people were like, could it be Quentin Byfield coming back? Could it be Byfield? And you're like, for a second, you're like, wait a minute, could it? Like, actually, could it?
And again, like, who knows if Marchand's healthy? Like, you had stuff working against you if you're the Bruins in terms of the injury, which I think hampered the outright value, and the fact that I think the Bruins did right. They wanted to do right by Marchand in terms of giving him a say, and he wanted to be on the East Coast, so that takes out a team like Vegas, takes out a team like the Kings, and again, remains to be seen what the Kings would have given up, but I think they have 2 first-round picks, or they have their own this year. They've got Byfield, which, again, I don't know if that measures out, but even like a guy like Brent Clark, who's been a rumored trade chip for a while, like that's a good piece for a offensively gifted right shot D. So they probably had more assets, but if you're going to do right by Marchand, putting him in a spot where he wants to go, and you add in the fact that he's banged up, and even if he's back in 3 to 4 weeks, it seems like it's definitely not concussion. I've heard that it's like shoulder, something like that, which again, you can be back for the playoffs, but that also does not magically heal. It's still going to be not 100%. So, the actual return is unfortunate. It's unfortunate, in a situation where you don't have Marchand finishing his career. But I do feel like we're not going to get the full grade until we figure out what Marchand does this offseason. Because if he goes somewhere else and signs a 3-year deal at 3-year, $21 million contract from the Bruins, I'm like, well, this sucks, but I don't want to be the team giving him that much money, especially when it's guaranteed. If his legs give out or his, can't play any further, they still have that money on the books. So I can see why they didn't want to do that. If he goes and re-ups with the Panthers for 3 years at $9 million, I'm not too happy about that because I think you'd rather keep him. But I do think when you look at what Friedman mentioned, I tend to, from what I've been hearing, believe more it's along that side of things in terms of it. The Bruins weren't like, I saw it as soon as like Marchand got traded. There was reports that it was like a $3 million per year contract.
I saw that.
Higher than that. I'm like, if that's the case, I can't believe that didn't. Yeah, I can't believe that was going to be the holdup. Nor would I think the Bruins lowball him to that degree, right? And so
take the Red Sox with Lester back in the day,
right? So again, if that changes and we get to free agency and see what happens, that's a tough look. But again, there's a lot of things go into it. Is someone going to sign him to that contract and Marchand doesn't play at all in this playoffs, or he's really ineffective? Like how he does moving forward and what he ends up signing, I think is how you give the final grade. So it's unfortunate that the Bruins weren't able to keep him, weren't able to, get a common ground. But if you're the Bruins and unfortunately, if you have to look towards the future, I'm not saying that like it was a necessary evil to get rid of a true Bruin through and through in Marchand, but if you're also trying to maximize your cap space, you'd love to have Marchand back on the Bergeron and Char deal, or hell, at a discounted rate. But if you are willing to give him, his current payout and he wanted more, and that already is like taxing what is already cap space you have to make the most of right now, I could see why the Bruins had to draw a line in the sand. It sucks, but it's kind of the same with like what Tampa is right now. They caught a lot of flack for letting Stamkos go, but did you want to be the guy paying him $8 million a year? So again, it sucks. It sucks, but also let's just see where all parties are in July in terms of what Marchand's getting on the market.
I agree. I also think with Marchand, it's interesting because yes, they didn't get enough.
Yes,
but they did get something. And I know there are a lot of fans out there who think, and I understand this because it's Brad Marchand, just keep him. Just keep him the rest of the year. And I understand that. I completely get that. And I don't hate that because a conditional second is just a second. And we like second round picks. But for Brad Marchand, that is ridiculously low. But there is the other side of it too, where it's like if they had just kept him after trading Carlo and Coyle, we would go, well, all right, you're not re-signing him. Or there's no announcement of an extension. Why did you hold on to him? Like, what was the reason? And John Sweeney's not going to come out and go, well, the Kings didn't offer enough or the Panthers didn't offer enough. Like, so we would be sitting here and going, why did you keep him? Like, you're clearly entering a 2 or 3 year retool. He isn't signed. He's going to walk in the offseason potentially. Why did you keep him? And there's the other end of it too, where it's like, if, I saw some people say, well, if you kept him around, maybe you find common ground in the next couple months for a contract. And maybe you do, but you haven't found common ground up to now at all. Clearly, like there was no progress made from the beginning of the season until now, which is early March. What makes you think in April or May or June or July, you're suddenly going to come to the table and say, I've had an epiphany. We're going to offer you the exact deal you want. Or he says, I'm going to come down to your deal. That's not going to happen. So that's where I'm conflicted, because it's like, yeah, you didn't get enough, but you did get something. And it's funny because this idea of him coming back in free agency, I've laughed at, but I've heard legitimate hockey people mention that, like older hockey people who've been around and experienced. I had an agent mention it to me who's like, I'm not saying that he's involved at all. He's not, but he did mention that. And I was like, that's interesting. I can't believe people actually think this, but enough people do and have said it where I'm like, maybe. I mean, you saw how broken up he was. I'm not saying I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be stunned by it. And like there was that the clip on Monday, right before Twitter went down for a bit, on NFL Free Agents Day of all things, which like,
of course, good shit, everyone.
Good job, Elon. But there was the clip of Marchand's introductory press conference, and he's getting all broken up about Sweeney and Neely and the Bruins and being here and how he wanted to be here. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen over the next 3 months, but I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't be shocked if he came back. Maybe he goes and sees another place and says, no, I want to be there. Whatever the price is, like, I'll come down to you. I just want to be in Boston. Now, I don't know. And I would be shocked if that, not shocked. I don't think that's going to happen, but maybe I wouldn't be shocked if it did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would be surprised.
I am on the same boat as you, right? Like I will believe it when I see it, because I know it's a fun narrative to talk about, and it would make life a lot easier for the Bruins if, hey, he comes back and maybe the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And it's like, you know what? I will sign for 3 and 9, which in that case, that's a great deal for the Bruins, right? Like that's, again, you just need scores. And even if he's not going to be a featured piece moving forward, which at this stage of his career, he necessarily shouldn't be, your team should be better around him, that he could be more of a middle six contributor than a top line player, a guy that you need to rely on night in and night out. Maybe that changes. I just always feel like the grass is always green, or getting that separation that trade does kind of open players' eyes to, like, you know what, I can chase what I want to do elsewhere. Like, I've had a great run. You can move forward with that. So I will believe it when I see it. Again, I have been wrong countless times this year, whether it's thinking the Bruins are going to be conservative at the deadline, or Evan, I can't wait till we get to June and we go through my preseason predictions, because they are fucking hilarious. It's like Montgomery's back, Marchand signs a 3-year deal, the Bruins play the Rangers in the conference. It is so bad that it's going to be a great episode.
It'll be great. So it'll be a light in the darkness.
It's like maybe that'll be the good way to end the year on a high note as Marchand does come back, but we'll see. It is so much up in the air with that in terms of how he plays, how he likes it down there. How his market changes, right? If he goes in the playoffs, and whether they win or not, but he's got, 12 points in 14 playoff games and looks great, some team's probably going to give him $6 million, if not more. So
it would also be weird though if he came back. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care that he was here 16 years. It would be weird for him to come back. And I'm not. It's not on him. It's not on him. Like, I'm not saying
it would be hilarious. Like, just getting July 1st, like the Marchand like wink, like GIF getting posted.
Yes.
I'd be like, Jesus,
with the book in front of his face.
Yeah, exactly.
But it would be weird. You'd give him back the C, most likely. He'd just come back into the lineup. And now, granted, like, what a move. You got you got a second for him, and you dealt these other players, and like, you are better suited for the future, and you do have Marchand. But it would be weird. It would be. And especially like if he went on and won a cup with Florida, or didn't do anything with them, or like, it would just be odd. It would be really weird. And I also think there's that end of it too. So there's a lot with Marchand that's odd. I'd encourage everyone to go read your column on sort of what he meant to the city. We could do that, and we could kind of eulogize him as he's still playing, but I think that column does a phenomenal job of that anyway.
I'll have to save it if he does come back. I'll just pocket that and fire it off again.
Just send it in 3 years when he retires, right? The exact
just change the goal totals and everything like that, and just fire it off in 27, 28.
You can do that. But first, I want to get into bigger picture stuff, what this all means. But first, our friends over at Prizepicks. Prizepicks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prizepicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long over at Prizepicks. Prizepicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks does not hit. Prizepicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. In terms of the Bruins, Pastrnak's still rolling. Geeky's still scoring. I like those 2 guys. I do. And Swayman's going to be more busy, so if you do have a Swayman prop and it's more saves, I'd probably take it. I probably would take it. So download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prizepicks, run your game. Run your game. The big question I have coming out of all of this, how long is this going to take? How long is this retool / rebuild gonna be? Because again, a lot, these picks are this year, next year. Marchand's is either 2027 or 2028. That's years down the road. Zellers is still in the USHL. I would say a ballpark estimate, 2 years at North Dakota, maybe 3. And then you're into so that's, end of the decade, like 2028, 29, that you're really getting your hands on him. Some of the pieces, Middlestat does help you right now, but a lot of these pieces are not going to help you right now. And you do have David Pastrnak in his prime, Charlie McAvoy in his prime, Jeremy Swayman entering his prime. So I think there is a legitimate question of, well, what is this going to be? And can they compete? Can they be playoff contenders the next couple of years? Now, as currently constituted, no. I mean, this roster is not good. I mean, as great as they were on Saturday.
Did you watch that game on Saturday, Evan?
Well, half of it. The back half, I was at Dexter and Rivers at 2 o'clock, which was a great game. Tremendous game. Lots of future NHL players, which is great. But I know that it obviously went really well, and the back half was great. The Kastelik goal, I was just
hilarious.
What a game for him.
This team works so hard for offense, and then that's the goal that goes in.
That's the goal. He beats the bag out of someone and then scores from the red line. Like, what a Mark Kastelik game. But it is a legitimate question of, when are they going to be competitive again?
It depends on who you ask. You ask Don Sweeney, they're going to be right back at it next year, which is maybe a little bit more optimistic, right? Because, and again, I think moving forward, they are in a much better spot where they at least have options, right? You've got guys at the NHL level right now that you hope can have more to give, like Middlestat. You've got younger players like
Elias Lindholm.
You got those situations where you're seeing how these guys can maybe bounce back. And,
should be fun.
You do have to weigh, like, you hope that they're, going into an offseason, it just as a clean slate in terms of guys that are banged up, right? Like McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm, guys that have had a down year, like Elias Lindholm, who's been, was injured, the first practice of the year. It just feels like this year, I think I mentioned this to Ty when we did a podcast recently, a lot of bullshit this year that I think, like, guys just need to get a clean slate, go to the beach, relax, heal up, and get a clean slate. And that's counting Jeremy Swayman as well. Coach had the foot
out the door. That was also fun.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there was a lot that went wrong this year that taking a breather, taking us back. And I'm not saying that as to absolve Elias Lindholm, who hasn't lived up to his contract, or Jeremy Swayman, who's really struggled this year. But I think from the Bruins perspective, maybe this is just their wishful thinking, but that these guys can step back in next year and just be a little bit more settled into their roles. And Swayman, of course, is going to be a big key in that moving forward. But yes, I think it's probably more wishful thinking of the Bruins in terms of thinking they'll be right back at it next year. I do like a lot of their moves, and what I said about having options, like you've got guys at the NHL level right now that, I mean, that's probably your biggest concern, is just bodies right there. But you've got intriguing guys, whether it's Middlestat. I know Yoki Haru's a free agent, but hell, if he plays like he did on Saturday next to Zadorov, like, I'll have that be your third pairing next year if you want to find the right deal for it. We'll see what happens moving forward. Like, it would fall in line with the impressive pipeline of teams, of players leaving Buffalo and not being ass. So, like,
You're right, and
I mean, there is
you're right.
that.
Maybe
And
that's it.
again, you're not asking for Yogi Hara to be a 20-minute guy, but like, if he does a simple, solid job, and that's kind of what he and Zadorov were, it's a piece. Like, again, for the Bruins to get back to being competitive, you already have star players at key positions between Pastrnak, McAvoy, Swayman, if he bounces back. It's all about just finding guys that fit in, right? And that's why, like, guys like Geeky are important. Zaka, like, yes, are they what you view as like top line players? No, but they do their role well. And if you fill out your roster with guys like that, and if Yoki Haru is a guy that fits that bill, then your roster that's coming into place, right? If a younger player like Fraser Minton, who I really, really like, I think is a guy that's really easy to project as being a solid middle six player. If he steps up, whether it's the end of this year or next year moving forward, he's still just 20 years old and he's already played 20 games, I think, at the NHL level. You're in a good spot. You've got draft capital now. You can flip some of them without draining your pipeline, which is also a good thing. Maybe they should keep tabs on more of their own draft picks, right? You don't want to trade all of them away, but it does give you options if there is a guy that you do want to pursue. If Brady Tkachuk wants to see what else is out there this offseason, if the Senators come up short or they have a disappointing run, what have you, you have options. I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but they do have the ability to be really active this offseason, and I expect them to do that, but it's still a lot they have to fill out. Like, I almost, talking to Ty about it, it was like, how I view this upcoming season, it's almost kind of like how you'd view maybe the year they like make the playoffs and then lose in the first round to the Senators, but you feel like you're building towards something. Like, maybe it's like that. Maybe they're better than that. Maybe, who knows? But it's kind of an exciting / a little scary, but exciting time for the Bruins, right? Because I think where they did rip off the Band-Aid and they did add all these new pieces, you like what they've done in terms of taking the next step forward. But now the hard work begins, right? Like, it's tough
Step
to
one
remove
was
these
good.
guys,
It's
but you
the
now
next
have to
step.
cash in. It's either you have to draft correctly. If you're going to relinquish some of this draft capital, it better be for impact players that help you out right away. You can't plug all the holes in this depth chart through free agency, right? Like, I don't want you to have all this money and then you spend it on both Ehlers and Besser and one of them can't live up to the bill or something like that, right? Or you don't want any half measures of how you want to handle all this cap space you do have. So it's exciting, and I think like it's fun to see what this team can do moving forward, even the remainder of this year where there's, I think, less consequences. Now you're just kind of rolling with it, see what happens, right? With the way they're playing, it's almost like a little bit of you can exhale a little bit, even though now the most Bruins thing ever is that they just go on a run and make the playoffs and ruin their draft.
That would be so them.
But it's an exciting time, though. A lot of new faces and a lot of potential for this team to really build off of it. As long as you have a 60-goal scorer and a top defenseman, honestly, 2 top defensemen if they're both healthy, and a goalie in Swayman who did what he did last year in the playoffs, you've got a good foundation in place. And it's not about hitting home runs every single time or signing Mitch Marner and Ehlers or something like that. If you just acquire enough guys that move the needle, like Geekies or the Zakas, or, if Yoki Haru fits into a role and just fills out the rest of your roster, it all kind of comes together. The Capitals, and they're the team that we all look at as a team that orchestrated a great retool on the fly. They've made smart moves, right, with like Dubois and Chikrin and all that stuff, but also they filled out the rest of their roster with just guys that are solid and fit in their roles, right? And I think that's the reason why they're where they are right now at the top of the Eastern Conference. That's what the Bruins need to do. It's not always about winning the first day of free agency or getting the flashiest player, but being creative, being bold, and bringing in guys that just move the needle for this team.
I think when it comes to contention, if they want to jump right back into it, which it sounds like they kind of do, I think they do, but I think they also want to make a lot of these, or at least some of these picks. I think the easiest step is you now have assets. Like, if you mentioned Brady Tkachuk, I mentioned this on the trade deadline live stream. Like, if you want Brady Tkachuk, you do have the pieces now. you have picks, you have some more prospects. They make some of your other prospects more expendable. Like you could put together a package to go get a Brady Tkachuk. Now Brady Tkachuk's also going to want to leave Ottawa,
Right.
Which I'm not saying that that's the case yet, but it sure seems like we're headed down that path. So there is that. Free agency is one area that people keep mentioning. You and I have been, I don't want to say pioneering, but definitely leading voices on you got to be wary with free agency.
Yes.
You do not want to be building your team through free agency. And we were proven correct last season or last offseason when they went out and signed Zadorov and Lindholm, because neither guy has really lived up to that money. Zadorov, though, is going to be playing a lot of minutes coming up. Oh, boy, he's going to be playing a lot. And he looked great. Him and Jokiharju were terrific on Saturday. Like, no hate there.
They were like unreal. Their numbers were like
great.
Bonkers.
Insane. Like, we've
made no sense.
We've given Zadorov a lot of crap this year. Maybe at his best game of the year on Saturday with Henry Jokiharju. But there is Mitch Marner out there that doesn't solidify every hole, and you do need to get a little wary because you are paying a good amount of guys a lot of money. Pastrnak, Swayman, McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm, Elias Lindholm, and Marner is probably out of all the free agents the most definite. Like, I think you can assume he's going to be a 70 at least point guy.
No, he'd be like 100 point. He's, as much as I think people like to crap on him, maybe because he's a smaller guy or Toronto, he's still a damn good player. That guy makes plays wherever he's with.
He undressed them the other day when they played.
He's a damn good player.
He's nasty. And so, again, and I think there's the other element to it as well. And they have the cap space, by the way, to go get Mitch Marner if they wanted to. I think where I touch on is like the Ehlers and the Besser. That's a little more uncertain in terms of guys you're going to get in free agency. But there is the other element of maybe you don't need a bona fide, legit number one center. Maybe you can survive, sort of like they did last season, with two just regular top six centers. And I think you have that in Zacha, and he works with Pastrnak. And I think that's what they were going for with Mittelstadt, where it's like, all right, we think this guy has the potential to be a top six center. Now, what's unfortunate is, where does Elias Lindholm fit in that? Because you're paying him a lot of money. Like, Lindholm obviously has fallen out of favor here. I'm still willing to give him a second chance next year. Like, give him a clean slate, as you mentioned. But I still don't know exactly where he fits. Like, maybe he does fit and Zacha moves back to the wing and Mittelstadt's a top six center, or maybe Mittelstadt moves to the wing, whatever it is. Maybe that's how they view it. Because the reality is, I was talking with Spoke Z about this. So this idea sort of came from him. It actually was. It was Friday night. No, it was the night of the deadline. And my friend, I got home late from Warrior, and all my friends were off doing stuff. My girlfriend was doing something else. I'm like, all right, you know what? I know he's over there. I'm gonna go debrief with him. And so we did. And one of the things that we talked about that was very interesting was the Bruins had a lot of success without a bona fide top 5 number one center in the NHL. Like, Patrice Bergeron, statistically, we said this when they had to replace him, was not up there with the Crosbys and the McDavid.
The shit out of this.
I know, in terms of points, he was one of the greatest two-way centers that ever lived, if not the greatest, most likely the greatest. But you don't need a center who's going to put up 90 points a season. You don't. You just need someone who's going to do the job and do it well. And Bergeron and Krejci were outstanding at that. Outstanding. And Bergeron obviously was a number one center. I'm not saying that he wasn't.
Yes.
But you get what I mean. It's like, you don't need a high point getter. And so maybe that's the route they take. Not saying that that's exactly how it's going to happen, but that's probably more realistic than saying, like, all right, the Bruins are going to go out and trade for their next number one center. They're gonna draft, you hope, their next number one center, but that guy's not going to be in the lineup for 3 or 4 years. He's over on Com Ave right now. So Hagens too, potentially. But I think that might be their route to contention is, beefing up on the wings, have serviceable, good, solid top 6 centers, and roll through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost like
punch the mic harder.
Yeah, I will actually. No, I do think if you're looking at the Bruins and like what right or wrong, right? Because I think there's probably people who, if I map this out, they're like, please don't fucking do this. But if they want to be competitive next year, right or wrong, whether that's accelerating it too much or as opposed to maybe letting it play out a bit more. It's like you invest heavily in the wings, remain competitive, and then you let the center situation solve itself. Whether that's you draft someone, if you have a top 10 pick and you wait for a O'Brien, or if you draft higher and it's a McQueen or friggin' Hagens or someone like that, you wait for one of those guys to step up, right, on their own timeline. And I hear like people talk about like the McQueen, the front, was it Frundell? There's too many Lundells, Frundells, all
I
these guys.
know.
Even on O'Brien, players like that, Denoyer, who's in the Quebec League, any of those guys, they're like, they're probably more of like 2Cs. I'm like, well, the Bruins don't have that either. So, like, sure, draft whichever is the best center available and let's see what happens.
Just take a center, please.
Yeah, just take a center. But yeah, I think like their approach, if they do want to be back at it next year, is kind of like the Vegas strategy before the center situation kind of solved itself and they fell ass backwards into it, right? So with Eichel. So it's like if you're the Bruins, you load up on wings, like you could make the case. Let's say it's like they target a guy like Marner or Ehlers or someone like that. It's almost like your first line right now, even if it's not flashy. You can look at Zacha, Geeky, and Pastrnak. Pastrnak is such a force. Put those guys together, you're getting max value out of Zacha and Geeky. That line's all set. Maybe they're not Marchand, Bergeron, and Pastrnak, but they're still a damn good line because Pasternak's driving play. If you've got guys like Middlestat and Lindholm, what have you, but you add in a playmaker like Marner, maybe all of a sudden you have a top six and you're good. You can keep that
that's actually not a bad. If you went into
if you're
next
trying to get
season,
a legitimate playmaker, like
if you
maybe
went into
that's
next,
kind of
if you went into next season with a top six of that top line of Zacha or of Pastrnak, Gigi, and Zacha, and then you also have
just another
Lindholm,
legit.
Marner, and Middlestat. Like,
Yeah, Middlestat can play on the left, so So I wonder if that's something, or even if it's a guy like Ehlers who has some warts because he doesn't play in them. He doesn't play well in the playoffs, but is fast and is really skilled, which is what clearly, if you look at who the Bruins acquired, whether it's guys like Middlestat, Minton, even like Hushmadinov, they're all known for having a high motor. So like they're clearly changing their approach there. So if it's loading up on the wings and then you let the center situation figure itself out, maybe save some cash for 26 when Eichel's a free agent and see what happens there. I'm trying not to focus too much on free agency because these guys rarely get to those points. And same with Marner. We'll see what happens. If you asked me 5 days ago what the Bruins should do, it'd be like you throw a bag at Mikko Rantanen because then your second line's all set. You've got a play driver there. But yeah, whether it's you wait for Eichel to be a free agent, you wait for your guy that you drafted to be here in a few years and you're competitive in the meantime, when the next talented center is sick of where they want to go, the guy I always throw up, my boy Clayton Keller, when he wants to leave Utah, and you have draft capital to use when, hell, maybe Florida sucks in 28 when you got a first-round pick. Maybe that has a lot of value.
They're headed for a rebuild then. Maybe it is.
So I do think, and again, not saying it's the best option, but if the Bruins want to be competitive, what I could see happening is you invest a lot of money or capital, whatever you want to do, to adding talent on the wings to either help you overload that top line or more realistically get someone that can drive play on that second line. And you have, again, two top six that maybe isn't flashy, but have enough talent that can keep you afloat and have you be productive. And then third line is whatever you want to do to fill things out. You've got younger players. You got guys that maybe can fill into those roles with Minton and Patra next year or what have you. You do have options. So I could see that being the case. But again, depends on who's available on July 1st, because that is trying to project free agency and those things is much tougher in terms of talking about it now and what's actually available once you get to that point of the summer.
I agree. And I also think some people might think they're going to stink for years. I push back on that because they have the core guys. You can't fully rebuild if you have those guys on your roster. Like you can't be a full-fledged, like you're in the top 10 of the draft for the next 5 years with those guys on your roster. It just can't be that. So I think that is the path that we just talked about, where it's like, all right, be serviceable for a couple of years, let guys grow into their own, make some of your picks, or, you trade some of those picks for better guys. Like Brady Tkachuk obviously is the big one, but there's other ways you can do it as well that maybe aren't as high profile. So I think that's the way into contention. Now, are they a cup contender next year? Probably not. Like, I would have a hard time believing that. But maybe you're a cup contender 3 years down the road. We look, it's not the same exact situation, but when they made all those trades heading into the 2015 draft, they were in the cup final 4 years later. So it's like, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they're cup contenders before the end of this decade. They're on a similar timeline. You have core pieces. They had core pieces back then. And a lot of those core pieces back then, I believe, were older than the core pieces now. You just had two centers who weren't number one, according to me.
How many 30-year-olds do the Bruins even have right now? It's like Lindholm, right? Elias Lindholm's 30. Hampus Lindholm's 30. And I think Zadorov might turn 30 in a month, but that's it. You got a pretty young team.
They're a young team. And so there's another piece to this, too. David Pastrnak met with the media in Tampa regarding all those moves for the deadline. And I got to say, seemed like a real leader. And I think I think one of the developments we're going to see out of the final, however many games left, 19, 20 games, one of the big developments we're going to see, McAvoy is not out there. And that's not his fault. He's injured, like all that. They're not giving out the C this year, before the end of the year at least. Does David Pastrnak solidify himself as the leader of this team going forward and get the C next year? I think there's a legitimate chance he does. He's been a solid leader this year.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with kind of just how he's handled a year where not a lot has gone right. And again, like we are only hear what he wants to say to the media. We're not there in the room during the lows, right? Other than post-game losses, what have you. But yeah, I've been impressed with Pastrnak in terms of taking more of a vocal leadership role, putting the team first. There's been multiple times where after losses, he's been asked like, "Oh, you got the 14-game point streak." He's like, I don't give a shit. I would give all of it up for a win. So yeah, I think he's been accountable. He's been focusing on the team-wide perspective. This is a guy that, I think the national markets paint him as this really colorful, flashy, fun-loving guy, which he is, but he's also a guy that wants to win. I think understands the weight of playing here. And the expectations put in place. And yeah, he's a guy that, whether it's him or McAvoy, but I wouldn't be surprised if Pasternak's making a pretty compelling case because he has been a really strong leader for this team when a lot has not gone right. And that's not to say that Marchand wasn't or what have you, but I think when you look at just the adversity they face this year, having guys like Pastrnak and even by extension now moving forward, McAvoy being put into these roles, and we can say whether they're ready for these roles, what have you, but it's almost kind of like when the Celtics traded Marcus Smart, and it's like you had these guys in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. I know different sport, but we're put into roles where maybe were they ready yet? Well, it's theirs. Let's see what they make out of it. And the results, I'm not saying the Bruins are going to win the cup next year, but I think putting these guys in these spots where maybe they're a little uncomfortable, but they step into it. If you're trying to build that, next chapter, that next foundation, you've got a 28 and a 27-year-old guy that are now the de facto. One of them is going to be the C, and the other one's going to be the 1B, right? It's kind of like Bergeron for years with Chara. And I think being put in those spots should benefit this team moving forward. They're kind of the few guys left that had the links to, again, the Chara years. Not even just the 1 year with Bergeron, like a lot of guys had, like Pavel Zacha, But yeah, I've been really impressed with what Pastrnak has shown so far this year. And beyond the skill on the ice, which is the most important thing for what he provides, I think it's not like he's just this guy clocks in, gets his goal, gets his 90-point season, and then he's out. He's invested heavily in, I think, this roster, and he's a guy that cares about winning as opposed to, I think, just his numbers. And it's good to have a guy like that I think has that focus, especially if it's going to be maybe a lean year moving forward.
And again, it's up to him. I mean, he's here. He's here for the long haul. And he's done a great job of it so far. And I really liked what he showed in that scrum in Tampa. This has been fun. What a time breaking this all down.
Lots to talk about. The monkey pots. We have nothing to talk about, Evan. Okay, how about the Bruins trade the whole roster?
Well, when we're in April and May, we'll be killing for this stuff. We'll be like, let's bring up the Marchand. Let's eulogize Marchand now, mid-playoffs. Why don't we do that?
I'll tell you what, though. It's there's more to look forward to. Even if the Bruins make the playoffs now, it's almost you have that release of let's just see what the young guys can do. Can Middlestat show something these final games? Are guys like Mitten going to get called up? Can Hushmadinov do anything? And I agree with what you said. Listen, there's a very clear chance that like this retool can go sideways. If you invest $8.5 million in Brock Besser and he's a 22 goal scorer, well, shit, like there's a lot of ways you can mess this up if you whiff on drafts. But it does feel like Bruins fans should have something to look forward to, even if it maybe hurts right now, where you hope this is the low point, because it does feel like whether it was like even Cassidy's last year, what was it, 21-22? From like that point onward, even maybe after like the Cup in 2019, you were just waiting. You knew even if you were enjoying things that there was one of these years where stuff was going to hit the fan and it was going to be a really painful couple of days. And there was parts of it that were parsed through, right, of Bergeron and Krejci retiring, stuff like that. But like I felt like Friday was the one that we were all waiting for, where it's like, wow, we are really tearing down this roster. We are starting anew. And you got that out of the way now. So you hope, again, not a guarantee, but now that you have that uncomfortable roster teardown over and done with, you're building towards something. If the Bruins don't make the playoffs, you can end this year being like, let's see what they got in the draft. Let's see what they do in the offseason. Next year, if they make the playoffs again and they're out in the first round, but younger guys show what they can do and you're building, you keep on having something to look forward to. Like they are kind of restocked to kind of start this new chapter, and not always going to be pretty. There's going to be stretches where we're probably going to be tearing our hair out, but there is stuff I think to look forward to. And you don't have that cloud hovering over you as to when is like this core and this foundation are their days going to be numbered. Like Dave Pastrnak's 28. You got to make good on these next couple of years to make sure he wants to be invested here, but that is your main priority. And odds are, considering how this team wants to be competitive, they're going to try to surround him with a new cast of characters moving forward. So it's scary. It's kind of sad. But I think there's a lot to look forward to moving forward.
And you don't know until you try. You don't know until you try. And I think that's the one thing with them, where this is the time to try that. And this is clearly the time to go for it. I also completely relate to what you say about for years. I mean, I said this to Diver. I remember doing podcasts with you in 2019-20 going, is the window still open? Is the window closed? I remember, I don't know if it was Krejci or someone after they lost to the Lightning in 2020 in the bubble saying like the window's like closed and all that. Like it just, that was 5 years ago. That was 5 years ago. And so right. I completely think that, the window has closed, but the next window is opening. And I think that there is hope for that. There's going to be misses in the draft, by the way. They're not going to hit on all these picks. But if they can hit on a couple, then the next chapter Bruins
Carter and Mikko, baby.
That's right, Carter and Mikko.
Hell, they got 2 first round. They got 2 second round picks now.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
Get a couple of BU guys. Get Simon Wang, man. Get Carter and Mikko. Get Trethaway. A lot of options out there.
You don't know until you try.
You guys, the better.
You don't know until you try. Connor, what can the people look forward to from you over at the Globe and Boston.com?
Yeah, you can read all my stuff over at Boston.com and the Boston Globe. We've covered every step of the way this Bruins season, moving forward over these final 17 games and what should be a very busy offseason. So you can read all my stuff over there. You're going to follow me on Twitter, X, whatever you call it these days. If it's friggin' working, which it wasn't doing most of today, you can follow me at Conor Ryan _93.
Go do all that. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. You Bruins Beat listeners. Have a great rest of your week.